Right, hey guys, how are we doing? Been a while, but we are back on another video from Explanation Point. And I really liked these videos in the past talking about SAO's changes from the abridgment to that and why everything's written better. And there's been other stuff we've checked out in the past. This one is how to write a good bad man. Now, I'm a big fan of Mushoku Tensei, big fan of the Chainsaw Man manga. I'm yet to carry on reading part 2 of the manga. I mean, yeah, but Chainsaw Anime, no, to stay with. I really like Denji and I really like Rudy as characters. Very flawed characters, like very questionable characters at times. But I feel like this is going to be a really interesting look into how to write a good bad man. So, like, potentially bad people being good. Yeah, let's get into it.
Mushoku Tensei Jobless Reincarnation might be one of the most morally abhorrent things to come out of Japan since 1937.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
So this video comes with just about every kind of content warning you can imagine applying to a show wherein a 34-year-old hikikomori is reincarnated as a lecherous baby in a society that does not value the autonomy of women. If you do not want to hear about this man's opinions on 9-year-old girls, then go watch my video about the anime where the boy marries the Moomin again or something. People seem to like that one. I have a fairly high tolerance for anime's idiosyncrasies, as long
I nearly paused that.
as the subject matter is treated with respect and used in service of a good narrative, then I can tolerate or even enjoy any number of things that should maybe rightfully make the average person click their tongue in puritanical judgment. After all, I'm the guy who made this entire video defending the more uncomfortable elements of the first season of Made in Abyss. And I am
which I've not still seen, but it could be potentially a video to watch after I have.
happy to stand against the K-pops to preach the merits of the first season of that show to this day. So it might be surprising to hear that I find the objectionable content in Mushoku Tensei nearly indefensible. Many knowledgeable
Oh, very interesting. Okay.
and well-respected members of the anime community have come out in support of Mushoku Tensei.
I mean, yep, we've seen the Giguk video, we've seen the Mother's Basement video. This is interesting. Okay, this is not where I thought this was going, but alright, okay, wow, alright, intrigue.
Saying that as long as you can ignore Rudy's crimes, the series provides a rich world with detailed characters and a fun plot that comes together in novel and interesting ways. I'm not going to argue that that's wrong. I'm going to argue that it doesn't matter. Mushoku Tensei does have a lot to like, including several instances of very good character writing, some of which involve Rudy, some of which involve Rudy being a sexual predator. The world is imaginative and fleshed out in ways that make you feel like it's a real place with a history that goes beyond what's happening on screen. The plot does honestly kind of feel like it gets bored with itself every now and again and has to shake things up to keep the author from falling asleep, but it's fun, and it would be worth experiencing for anybody who enjoys a classic fantasy adventure story, if not for him. He is the reason that none of that matters.
Wow, so Rudy himself, okay.
This unwashed, rudder-snubbing crake of a man whose gentlest ethical transgressions could drive the cast of O Maidens to merciful self-unalivement. Rudius Notos Greyrat, a man worthy of his name, is the most off-putting, disdainful, and viscerally disgusting protagonist I have seen from a majorly popular work in 6 years of being a professional internet anime man.
Damn.
And Mushoku Tensei deserves better than him. But why? Why, when there are so many popular series that feature lecherous and crude protagonists, does Rudus Ratboy stand out as the king of the slime men? How does Chainsaw Man, whose protagonist is just as horny as Rudy, if not more, become the new golden calf of the anime community, while Mushoku Tensei's fiercest defenders have to preface all of their arguments with vehement assurances that Rudy gets better later? Let's take a glance at a few different shows and see how they're able to explore the same themes of self-improvement, sexual exploration, loneliness, etc., without creating that same sense of disgust in a viewer and throwing away any sense of decency or respect toward the women they depict. There are two big problems with Rudy's behavior that set him apart from the likes of Denji Chainsaw Man.
Okay, wow, okay, I wasn't expecting this to be like a comparison between the two as to, alright, cool, okay.
Frequency and severity. To anyone who's seen the series, I shouldn't have to explain what I mean by this, but in case you're a freak who likes to watch analysis videos of shows you know nothing about, here is a brief list of Ratman's indiscretions.
Okay.
Upon being born, he notes his mother's huge tits and reaches for them with his creepy little baby hands because she left herself open. He watches his parents have sex. He takes his maid's underwear out of the laundry bag.
The weird thing about it is, though, he probably doesn't look at them as as his parents, if you know what I mean. Like, it'd be really, really creepy if he looked at them like that, but he doesn't. They're just two people doing it, and I don't know.
Basket and puts them on his head under the guise of being just a little guy.
That was weird, because especially when you take into consideration that he is an old person, and that was
He sneaks
strange.
around the door frame to watch his tutor change clothes without her consent, then steals a pair of her panties that he will spend the rest of the series calling the Holy Relic. Then episode 2 ends. All of this being garnished with him staring at and making lewd comments about all of the women in his life at basically any point when his attention isn't being taken up by learning magic. The sheer volume of unacceptable behavior from Rude Baby is staggering, to the point where even I, as someone who has significant experience with the way anime is, and whose favorite part of the Lord of the Rings movies is when they stay in the Shire for a long time, find these opening episodes nearly unwatchable. There is no reprieve. No time for my brain to roll its eyes and pull out a notepad to write this off as typical anime bullshit. Whenever the series presents something that I could latch onto and start to enjoy, it is undercut within minutes by a comment about some woman's undercarriage or the forcible denudation of a 5-year-old. Not having any time to breathe between Rudy's incorrigible actions takes a highly competent slow burn opening and turns it into a high-velocity wind tunnel pointed directly at the viewer's open parachute. This is the time that the series should be spending showing us all of the things that are good about it, and while it does do that, those good bits are hard to enjoy when we know that he is peeping out from behind every corner, constantly threatening to make us take in a slow, deep breath and groan, "Why is Japan like this?" to a conspicuously empty house. A good counterweight for this is Neon Genesis Evangelion. As much as I hate that series, and you can feel free to leave your comments
Whoa, what?
about that now, it is basically unmatched in its depiction of a teenage boy who has a complicated relationship with sex and romance, at least when it comes to shows that aren't specifically about that. There are plenty of moments where this series puts Shinji in situations that would fit into usual anime stereotypes. Ignoring any conversations about trope subversion or thematic meaning in Evangelion's lewd moments, because that's not the point here, they are few and far between, with one big thing happening every few episodes, interspersed with maybe a couple of sidelong glances at a character's chest. By the time Shinji does something completely irredeemable in the hospital during End of Evangelion, the viewer has had 26 whole episodes to understand how Shinji came to be so fucked up, and the gut-punching nausea that that scene elicits is a testament to his character and all the trauma he's been through up until this point. Rudy does at least 3 things that are on par with this by the end of episode 8.
Yeah,
which brings
right, okay, yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah, okay.
us to the severity issue. I will never say that it is impossible to make a viewer sympathize with anyone, but if you are going to make your protagonist a literal child molester, then you have a hard road ahead of you. It can be done. Happy Sugar Life almost does it, and we'll get into some ideas of how Mushoku Tensei could do it in a minute, but for now, suffice it to say that at the time of the first child molestation incident, the series does not give the viewer any reason to believe that Rudy is anything other than unrelenting scum. This is the most important thing working against the series that sets it apart from other shows that toe similar lines, so I'm going to say it plainly. Denji Chainsaw Man does not molest children.
I mean, that's very true, yes.
Stripping Sylphie could be hand-waved as an off-color joke. It might even have been funny in Always Sunny or Shameless or something. Stealing panties and spying on women changing could just barely be thrown into the far end of the typical anime bullshit barrel. But the second that Rudy's 42-year-old hand reaches for Eris, the series loses all illusion of restraint or decorum.
Wait. It's like... I agree. Okay, I agree. When you take into consideration this is a guy that's 42 years old, this is wrong. But when he mentions that he pervs on his mum and dad doing it and the boob thing and that, again, he's a 42-year-old man just, like, not seeing his mum and dad, I guess. I don't know. Like, I've never been reincarnated into another world and then, like, just got, oh, okay, they're doing it, cool. Like, you know, but I don't know.
It is simply a bridge too far. I recognize that everyone is going to have a different number of bridges that are acceptable to them, but anyone who isn't already drowning in the river of impropriety should agree that this is one too many. So the easy answer for what Mushoku Tensei could do to keep from needing such a hearty disclaimer is just to dial it back and reel it in. But don't do things people don't like is a boring answer. And I want to know how the series can still do the things that people don't like, but get away with it.
Yeah,
the
okay.
biggest structural issue standing in the way of Mushoku Tensei being more generally acceptable is that it is an isekai. If this were a traditional fantasy with a protagonist who was born into this world, then a lot of the less savory elements of this series become much more acceptable instantly, and some of the worst ones become downright good. To be clear, the series would lose a lot if it didn't have its isekai elements. Much of what makes Rudy's character compelling comes from the clash between his former hikikomori life and his new self that he's trying to cultivate in Otherworld, and one of the more interesting plot points of Season 2 is very much dependent on the isekai formula. At the same time, I think a lot of Mushoku Tensei's ick factor can be attributed to the fact that Rudy is not in reality a child. All of his interactions with Eris might look like this, but this is what's actually happening.
Yeah.
I have heard people argue that because the biological age of Rudy's Isekai Land meat suit is only 7 years old, Rudy's 42 years of combined lived experience do not make him an adult. Stop believing that. As the series is written, Rudius Grey Rat is a fully grown man who consistently lusts after and takes advantage of a child. You know who has a really hard time taking advantage of children? Other children. If Rudy were an actual child instead of a deranged millennial with a weird aversion to chain link fences, the series could change very little else and go from sadequate to adequate overnight. Consider the scene in episode 8 when Rudy finds Eris sitting on his bed in her dressing gown, having been sent there
dead awkward. This episode was
by Philip to try to tempt Rudy into helping him take over the family. With Eris's verbal consent, Rudy succumbs to that temptation and begins to take her up on Philip's offer. Looking at this scene from Rudy's perspective, there is good reason to find the entire situation viscerally and unambiguously disgusting. This is a man from modern-day Japan with 44 years of lived experience. Even accounting for his limited interactions with women in his previous life, Rudy should be aware of all of the reasons his actions here are unacceptable. He should know that it's not all right to have sex with your biological cousin, for example, or that a 10-year-old is incapable of giving consent even when she is not being coerced by her father into helping him orchestrate a coup. And he does know that Eris is being coerced into this situation because he says that the only reason he doesn't jump her immediately is because he would be playing right into Philip's hands, which is him acknowledging that her verbal consent does not come from a genuine place.
And I'm sure that's like lower than the legal age of consent in Japan as well, isn't it? Like, not that I'm trying to, you know, I never thought about yeah.
Because Mushoku Tensei is an isekai and Rudius Nudius Gratudius is an adult, the scene that plays out features a 44-year-old man attempting to touch the vajussi of his 10-year-old biological cousin whom he knows to be under duress. And that is not okay. But take that exact same scene and remove all of the isekai elements. Make Rudy an actual 10-year-old with 10 years of lived experience. Someone who has never had to think about issues of consent. Someone who was raised in this society. Someone who might vaguely understand what it means to be head of the family, but who can't possibly comprehend the intricate web of manipulations involved in playing the Game of Thrones. If a real child hears Eris say that it's all right to do whatever it is he wants to do, then I think it's pretty forgivable for a real child to take her at her word. And when a real child gets the absolute crap beaten out of him for doing something that he thought he had permission to do, then it can be tragic when he lays on the floor confused, thinking that the problem is that he took things too far too fast and didn't employ all of the strategies that he learned from dating sims about what girls really want.
I mean, yeah, he's not wrong. he's really not. It's not wrong if you took into consideration if it was an actual the isekai aspect does make it really, really weird.
Quick side note here: there is a huge discrepancy between the sub and the dub when it comes to Rudy's reaction to this situation that is going to completely change the way this scene reads. Here's a comparison between the sub and the dub lines.
Did I think I know how love interests feel after playing all those dating sims? So that's the sub. Oh. I know what girls want. I've played dating sims. Oh, so he's like, The sub's like, oh god, okay, yeah.
The subbed line here being an admission that he was foolish to think that dating sims would actually teach him anything about how to treat other people, and the dubbed line giving the impression that Rudy thinks he made a tactical error here because he didn't apply what he learned from dating sims to the situation. I don't know which of these two translations is closer to the original Japanese, and I can only imagine that this is not the only such discrepancy between the two translations. I watched the dub, I always watch the dub. Everything in this video is related to the dub. Okay, back to it. Being a kid would also change the perception of other scenes of Rudy doing inappropriate things. The various times when he steals women's underwear, or that occasion when he touches Eris's boobs, don't suddenly become okay if Rudy isn't an adult, but it's certainly easier to understand them as childhood indiscretions
yeah, okay, right, yeah.
than as inexcusable behavior that he should have grown out of by now. And that would provide a potential viewer with a personality flaw that shows promise of getting better over time, especially if it is properly addressed in-universe. What Mushoku Tensei shows us now is a grown man whose attitudes haven't changed in 4 decades leering at a prepubescent girl like this, and if that isn't something you can already tolerate, then the series doesn't give you much reason to think that things are going to get better. But he does get better, you scream, clutching your limited edition Roxy Magurdia figure with removable cloak to your
I mean, he does. He does.
Chest, like the Inquisition is coming to take you away. He gets better may as well be the tagline of the series for as often as I have heard those words applied to Rudy. And while I do think that Rudy's personal growth in the series is severely oversold, I also think that it's irrelevant to what I'm trying to say here for a few different reasons. Let's say that by the beginning of Season 2, Rudy has completely turned himself around and come to understand the errors of his ways. He has sworn off child molestation permanently and cut off his dick as penance for the harm.
You are safe, small one's growth.
That growth doesn't matter if the people who care about Rudy growing have already stopped watching by episode 6. The series doesn't give any indication that this behavior from Rudy is anything other than typical isekai harem misogyny gone too far for the sake of eliciting a strong reaction from the viewer. Groping girls without their permission is played for laughs well into Season 2. When Rudy faces consequences for his behavior, they are almost invariably your standard epic punch to the face, sometimes followed up by the victim's assurance that she'll be down to bang in 5 years, when she's 15 and he's 49. And while I understand that Rudy is the protagonist of the series and that we see things from his point of view and that people aren't prone to seeing themselves as villains, the fact that he displays no real understanding about why the things he's doing are wrong does not send the message that this is something that's going to get better on its own. In fact, Rudy's guilt only really shows itself when he doesn't get what he wants and laments that he probably won't get it in the future if he keeps acting this way. It usually doesn't have anything to do with the harm he's done or the real issues behind his actions. Thing is, though, that Rudy getting better is not the point, because Rudy being a bad man is not the problem. We are long past the days where every piece of media has to be a morality play. Characters do not have to be role models. The problem with Rudy is not that he does bad things, it's that those bad things are boring. I don't think there is an inherent moral problem with depicting basically anything in media, and that includes everything that I have already criticized Rudy for in this video.
Okay.
The problem comes when sensitive subject matter is used carelessly, and the more sensitive the subject, the more care needs to be taken with it.
Yeah, okay, right. He's making a lot of very valid points with it. You can't just throw it about, I guess. I think I don't pay too much attention to the fact that he is as old as he is. But still, it is
To be completely fair to Mushoku Tensei, it does attempt to tie Rudy's lecherousness into the deeper points of his character by connecting it to the trauma he endured at the hands of the dreaded line cutter. But it simply does not do that well enough, often enough, or deeply enough. We know that Mushoku Tensei is capable of pulling complex emotional arcs out of unexpected places, which just makes Rudy's treatment of the girls in his life all the more thoughtless. What could possibly make a scene like this interesting to watch? Well, since Eris is asleep, the only possible thing is Rudy. What is he thinking? What is he feeling? What kind of path did his life go down that led him to being the kind of person who would do this? It is not enough for the viewer simply to be able to intuit or research these things. They have to be the focus of the scene when something like this happens, and instead we get this face from Rudy along with some wonderful commentary about how Eris has the potential to become an E-cup someday if she works really hard. Some people will will say that there is no possible way to present this that isn't pointless and gratuitous, but I disagree. There are a few different paths I could see an author taking if they wanted to have Rudy do the same things for more or less the same reasons without it feeling so over-the-top icky. First, don't do away with the isekai angle like I talked about earlier. Lean into it. Take advantage of the fact that Rudy is a grown man in a child's body to create intrapersonal tension. Mushoku Tensei already uses Rudy's stretchy kid brain as a clever justification for him being able to learn magic and languages as quickly as he does. Take that same concept and apply it to attraction. Have Rudy's 10-year-old body be naturally attracted to other 10-year-old bodies, but have his 44-year-old brain be very much not on that train. Erase...
Oh, that would be very interesting. That would be an interesting approach, okay.
And Tokyo Revengers both touch on this. Both series feature adult men in child bodies having romantic feelings for young girls, and while both are uncomfortable, neither of them is anywhere near as gross as Mushoku Tensei, because both of these quote-unquote romances are portrayed as sources of strife for the characters, not something that the viewer is just supposed to go along with. I've only seen half of the first season of Tokyo Revengers, so if that winds up being very off the mark later on, I'm sorry. But if a series wants to get real interesting, then I can imagine a character like Rudy having a childhood friend or a girlfriend whom he lost for some reason. Maybe she moved, or she died, or she abandoned him once he started getting bullied. Someone whom he has always associated with ease and comfort, and whose absence leaves a huge mark on his life. And then, in a character like Eris, not Rudy sees the echoes of this past relationship and feels like having a connection with Eris will give him back some semblance of that feeling that he had before he lost this friend of his. He knows it's wrong. He knows it's selfish, and he knows that it is hurting Eris in ways that he will never be able to make right again. So this kind of angle would have to come with a lot of explicit guilt. But the big thing that would have to change between the actual scenes that we get and the hypothetical scenes that I'm talking about is that the guilt and regret expressed by the character would have to happen in the moment. There is a scene in episode 7 where Rudy goes to grope Eris while she's sleeping again, but he sees Ghislaine's ring on her and he stops. That scene is about as good as you get with this series. It perfectly displays a tension between what Rudy wants and what he knows to be right, and it lets those two things battle for a moment in his head. In this scene, doing the right thing wins, but that's not what makes the scene worth watching. What makes this moment great is the tension, the choice that our hero has to make to be good or to be selfish. If that choice were at the forefront of all of his objectionable actions, then we could talk about how satisfying it is that Rudy gets better later, but it isn't. Sometimes he faces consequences. Sometimes he feels guilty after the fact. But the actual scenes where these things happen are not, by themselves, interesting. Until they are, but by the time that happens, the people who care the most have already stopped watching the show. They do not provide a reason to watch them if you aren't entertained by what's happening on screen, and considering what's happening on screen, that's going to be a viewer retention problem. Denji Chainsaw Man is an excellent point of comparison here. Denji's...
Okay, this is going to be really interesting. I've never really looked in depth at Denji's character, so comparing him to Rudy from... Alright, let's go.
Entire personality is covered in a layer of manure so thick that he could not eat his way out of it even if offered $10 whole, but despite being such an unrelenting goober, the consensus among the anime community seems to be that he is a good boy who is worthy of compassion and protection. Denji gets revved up just as much as Rudy does, if not more. He literally wants nothing more out of life than to eat jam on toast and touch a boob. So why are these sexual situations in Chainsaw Man such an indelible part of the series' charm? Long story short, they are complicated. When Himeno brings Denji back to her apartment, there are so many thoughts and feelings swirling around in Denji's empty little skull. Carnal desire, fear, hope, apprehension, lingering disgust. He doesn't wait until the act is over and the viewer has had time to enjoy their sexy sex scene before he starts getting into the weeds of it all. We see that while it is happening, which is what creates the emotional depth of the scene and sets up any potential growth that Denji could experience as a result. Same thing happens when he goes to touch Power's boobs and starts to realize that he doesn't actually want what's on a girl's chest, but what's in a girl's chest. Mushoku Tensei doesn't totally lack this sense of introspection when it comes to its more questionable elements, but it's fairly light on it, and it almost never comes while those elements are on screen, which makes most of its sexual content feel thematically empty, whether it actually is or not. Putting more focus on guilt and selfishness during Rudy's negative moments would also help with the sense that his character is disjointed. The series does not hide the fact that Rudy is made of 50% industrial runoff, and it largely doesn't want to make the viewer believe that he is a purely altruistic person, but Rudy is hard neutral good. For all his faults, he is a person who does the right and noble thing purely because it is the right and noble thing, whether it benefits him or not. He saves Sylphie from bullies, works to improve Regird's reputation, saves enslaved beastfolk children, protects a village from bandits after they wrongly imprison him, and pushes a teenager out of the way of an oncoming truck. He makes mistakes and errors in judgment that sometimes lead to catastrophic outcomes, like the death of Goblin, but that usually happens because he's trying to do too much good and overplays his hand. He monologues to his father about the importance of protecting the weak when they can't protect themselves, but apparently sleeping 9-year-olds aren't the weak. It's fine for a character to have contradictory personality traits. People are made of contradictions, but those contradictions have to come in conflict with each other. This is the main problem I have with the idea that Rudy gets better later. It is true that his behavior gets toned down as the series goes on, but in large part that isn't due to legitimate growth from him. Rudy stops sexually assaulting Eris, but not because he reflects and realizes that his behavior towards small girls is indefensible. It's because he comes to respect Eris specifically as a warrior and as a person, and is no longer willing to hurt her for his own selfish gain. The people around him also get older as time goes on. He stops molesting grade schoolers, sure,
Yay.
but that's largely because
God.
he stops being around grade schoolers, except for the one he owns as a slave. He doesn't stop molesting girls, his victims just reach a more typical age for anime shenaniganery. So it becomes easier to just roll your eyes and bear with it for anyone who's seen more than one isekai. It's true that he seems to get less of a naughty thrill out of his actions than he did in season 1, but that's because any interaction with a woman reminds him of that one time he had sex with a teenager and she fled in the night without saying goodbye, just as I would. Not to mention that his dick don't work. Growth comes from self-reflection and acknowledging your own faults. Giving up things you enjoy because of your trauma is not growth, it's pain avoidance. For people who care about seeing Rudy overcoming his negative attitudes and breaking harmful habits, the line that Mushoku Tensei draws from Rudy in season 1 to Rudy in season 2 is not going to be satisfying. And this idea of dissonance doesn't just apply to Rudy's character. The presentation of the series itself does not work to prime a viewer for the kind of introspection they're going to have to do to enjoy or tolerate watching Rudy do his thing. Mushoku Tensei is an isekai, and it starts in a way that has become very common for isekai. A sprawling, Tolkien-esque fantasy world with optional JRPG elements, a young child as a protagonist, physically beautiful characters in a sunny, tucked-away little farming village with the promise of adventure beyond every hill, and that gives the viewer certain expectations, especially when it comes to lewdness. Fan service, scantily clad women, the occasional off-color comment from a comic relief side character, and a protagonist who could absolutely have sex with any woman he wanted, but who refuses as a matter of gallant chivalrous pride or an appalling lack of situational awareness. Sexual elements in these kinds of shows are rarely treated in a serious manner. They are lighthearted attempts at comedy, or they are nervous, one-sided affairs designed to arouse the viewer and go nowhere. Or they are rape scenes, where explicitly evil characters give the protagonist a chance to save a distressed damsel. They are designed to elicit very simple reactions, laughs and hype and or erections. The sexual elements in Mushoku
I was not
Tensei
expecting
do
that
not
one,
do
okay.
that, and they often are not trying to, which causes dissonance between a viewer's expectations and what actually happens on screen. This largely is not Mushoku Tensei's fault. It was one of the first isekai of its kind, and it put in a lot of the groundwork for developing the tropes that other series built on to create these expectations. But for a modern viewer who is watching an anime series that is ongoing at the time of this video's publication, those expectations are there, and they can cause problems. The setting of the series features prominently in the Mother's Basement video, Mushoku Tensei is Art, You Philistines. In it, Jeff discusses the line between depicting unbalanced sexual situations as an integral part of a medieval European society and creating a setting intentionally that allows an author to depict unbalanced sexual relationships for reasons beyond artistic integrity. Jeff states that while Mushoku Tensei teeters back and forth on that line, he believes that its depiction of sex is done more for the sake of creating a believable European-coded setting than not. And while questions of intent do not interest me, I think that there is an easy argument to be made that world building is not the main concern of a series that features this three-boobed Adventurers Guild receptionist, bartender, and Alina Lease Dragon Road, the elf who is cursed to be slutty. That argument being, just look at it. Look at all of the women in Season 1. Literally all of them. Each and every single one of them has giant worlds just right for the building, most of them tucked into built-in globe pockets in their clothes so that the viewer can admire their geography even when the atlas is closed. And that's assuming that they wear clothes at all. Looking at you, Madam Titty Kitty, that is a quote. Roxy is the only notable exception, besides Kishirika Kishirisu, who does not convince me that I'm wrong. Not to sound like Ben Shapiro, but I find it curious that a world that allegedly prizes realistic depictions of sexuality in medieval European society seems to think that the average contemporary bust size was somewhere between a cantaloupe and a humpback whale. For contrast, look at the cast of the 100 Girlfriends Who Really, 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 Really Love You.
Okay.
100 Girlfriends is an unabashedly stupid and sexy harem show about teenagers trying to work their way through a weird polyamorous relationship dynamic that God has forced them into on threat of death. But unlike most other stupid, sexy harem shows, 100 Girlfriends spends a good deal of its time characterizing and humanizing each of the protagonist's destined soulmates. It presents a highly diverse roster of partners and makes sure the viewer knows exactly what Rentaro likes about each of them. Importantly, what Rentaro likes about them never boils down to she has big boobs. Because while Rentaro will certainly not complain about exactly half of his first 5 girlfriends having giant boobs, that is not where the series' priorities lie, and the character designs reflect this. In addition to depicting girls with different interests and personalities who come from all walks of life, the manga shows women of all different heights, body types, hair colors, eye colors, bust sizes, ages, and family resemblances. So while it feels weird to praise a series just for depicting women of different shapes, especially when they all happen to be skinny Japanese girls, it does speak to the goals of the series in a genre where this is very much not the norm. Looking at Mushoku Tensei's roster of dramatis mulieres does not give the impression of a series that wants to sell itself as a serious, character-driven high fantasy epic. And there, in my longest video yet, is an extensive list of ways that I believe Mushoku Tensei could help to sell itself to potential viewers without sacrificing what it wants to do with its story. Part of the reason I made this video is because I saw a lot of people I respect expressing how much they love this series, and I felt like there should be a video on the opposite side. Part of it was that I was getting tired of people telling me that Rudy can't possibly molest Eris because she's older than him, but mostly it was frustration. This video would not exist if I didn't think that Mushoku Tensei had the potential to be great. The way that it explores grief and loneliness, isolation and toxic masculinity, the intricate plot and the detailed world, and the fact that the only reason I didn't tear up at certain points in Season 2 is because I made a vow with myself early on not to let Rudy Mushoku Tensei's erectile dysfunction make me feel even a single emotion no matter what. I want to like this show. I want more people to be able to experience the things that it's trying to do well. And more than that, I want more shows to be able to tackle the kinds of problems that this series fumbles with and do it in a way that is graceful and engaging enough to draw viewers in instead of push them away. Because the things that Mushoku Tensei tries to say are important. I just wish it acted like it.
Well, that was an interesting video. That was really not what I was expecting to go into, and it did make me think about myself a little bit. I was like, ooh, because I really like Mushoku Tensei. I think it's a really, really good anime, but then it's like, if you look at it in certain ways, it's a bit questionable and a little bit creepy. But the second half of Season 2 is back in April, and I'm very excited. Thank you to my patrons. If you want to have your name at the end of every video I upload, links in the description to the Patreon page, $1 above slash, but that's greatly appreciated. Thank you so much for that. And thank you all for watching. What do you guys think of that? What do you guys think of this? Click like, subscribe if you haven't already. Leave comments below. Let me know what I should watch and discuss in future videos. See you guys next time. Bye.